let's go.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our continuing Ocean and Coastal Resource Management lecture series. We are really happy today to have a local hero, Daniella Russo from Think Beyond Plastic. And you know, I don't think this audience needs to know, much intro about the plastic pollution problem in the oceans. It's probably what motivated you to come here. And what's really awesome about the work that Daniella's doing is it's not just a kind of, how do we have a nonprofit government kind of response, but actually how can we merge private sector and business innovation into the solution, which is really what we need for something to scale at the level that would really tackle the pollution plastics problem in the ocean. So I think I will let Daniella tell you all about it, and so let's please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you all for choosing to spend Halloween night here. I tried to come up with some cool jokes about Halloween and I failed, so my son just said, "Mom, don't even try, just go start talking." Can't make stupid jokes, but we welcome the witch. Very kind introduction, Jason. Thank you. I'm no hero. I am just the person who has an idea that has been motivating me for the last 10 years, and I'm here to share that with you. I felt that the topic that I wanted to discuss really is Think Beyond Plastic, the circular economy, and plastic pollution, and the connection between all of these. And by way of starting, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the company, because so much about a business has to do with the people who start it, and the people who run it, and the people who are currently involved in it. And I think to understand that, you need to understand where we all come from. So I grew up as an idealistic kid in a communist country where we all heavily practice circular economy. And what that means is we never bought anything. I mean, if I needed a bookshelf, my mom would go to a shed in the yard and she would get some, pieces of wood and a couple of bricks and paint it and then put it up in my room, and I had a bookshelf. Pretty much everybody who needed something first used resources that were available. And for those of you, the younger ones in the audience, if you talk to your grandparents, I think they will tell you that post-war attitude here in this country was the same. Hardly anything was ever thrown away. And circular economy was a fact of life, and so was the communist ideal of actually working as hard as you can and helping those who cannot, and taking only as much as you need. So everybody was supposed to contribute to society according to their capabilities and taking only what they need and nothing more. And it took me a while to realize that these principles were something that was very inspirational for some of us, and not for those who ruled the society, but that took a while. My parents were impoverished intelligentsia, and I guess we didn't think impoverished because everybody was relatively poor at the time. My grandfather was a very famous Bulgarian painter who was so idealistic that he actually dared to criticize the communist government. And 2 months later, he mysteriously died from tuberculosis. My other grandfather towed the party line, and then he earned the disrespect of our entire family. And it took me a while to figure all this out. And so I grew up believing that you have to give back, that leadership is something that was very important. And this little girl you see there was just across the whole town to give a talk at an auditorium with about 100 people about communist values. And my mom had told me to take off that skirt and just, to take off the pants and just keep the skirt and wash my boots before I got on stage, but I didn't care. I was just there and I was ready to give my talk. So, at the age of 25, I kind of understood that we were given a party line, that some were doing very, very well and the majority weren't. And I took an opportunity to come to the United States, which was a business trip, and with $70 in my pocket, I found myself in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I didn't know a soul. And what I knew is that there is a better life than the one I was leading, and that there are people who lived in a different way, and I wanted to be a part of this. Being in Silicon Valley was honestly lucky for me. I started with a company called Sun Microsystems at a minimum wage. I was a filing clerk. And 20 years later, and having started several companies in between, I found myself back at Sun Microsystems running a billion-dollar business unit and making servers that became the foundation for the internet at the time. There were great times to be in Silicon Valley. This was the time when we were changing the world and creating technology. It wasn't about money, and it wasn't about who is going to drive a faster car or who is going to have a bigger house. It was all about changing the world. It was some of the most exciting time of my life, honestly. And in that spirit, it was an incredible time to believe that you can change the world with something that you know how to do. So what I learned how to do in these 20 years is start businesses, start companies, do that very, very well. I took a company public, I rang the starting bell on NASDAQ. And what I also learned is that there is more to life than just making money. So this was the point, and I was about 42, I think, when I decided that it's time to defect for the second time. And so my friends often say I defected twice, once from communism and once from capitalism, which is kind of true, I guess. But I looked around and I was thinking, I left my entire family behind, I left my entire life behind, I changed my life, and it's not just to go and make money. Money is good and it's very important, but I've learned more than just how to do that. And so then the question was, what would I do with my life and with what I knew how to do? And what happened, and it was very lucky for me, is that I ran into a group of filmmakers who were making a film about the ocean. The film was called Strange Days on Planet Earth. It was a National Geographic production. And the film they were making, this particular one, was about plastic in the ocean, and I knew nothing about plastic in the ocean, absolutely nothing. And in fact, I always thought that people who cared about the environment were just people who didn't take showers and wore Birkenstocks and, hemp bracelets. And the group of filmmakers said, we need a business person to help us out. And I said, well, I will try, but I don't know anything about filmmaking or the environment. This is how I got acquainted with the issue of plastic pollution, plastic in the ocean, and impact of plastic on people, the marine life, and human health. The film, if you have not seen it, is still one of the best production values out there. It's a phenomenal film. Those of you who have worked with me in our offices have seen it. I loved it. And here came an epiphany. So I helped the team put together the business plan around raising the money for the film and all that. And then I realized the film aired on PBS. It was terrific. And as everybody was partying in the pub because the episode was airing, hardly anybody was paying attention. And I was thinking, how is this message going to reach millions of people if it's just running for 1 hour on TV like this? There is somebody drinking beer, somebody having wings, and meanwhile, we're talking about something so profound and so important, something that's really touched me, something that became part of my life. Because for 1 year, I kept thinking, I am this bird, I'm this mother who's feeding her babies with plastic, and I want to go and tell the whole world about this. And I was convinced that the movie will do this. And this was the moment when I realized the movie is not going to do it. That what we need is actually a campaign to tell the whole world about this. And in my naivete, I thought, if only we were to tell everyone, people surely will change their ways. I mean, nobody will use plastic anymore if they just knew how bad it is, right? It makes sense. Plus, I knew it all because I had just come from Silicon Valley and, I've done all these amazing things, and that was the answer. That was in 2009. So we launched a campaign called Think Beyond Plastic. Think Beyond Plastic was launched right here in Monterey with a $500,000 grant from the Packard Foundation and National Geographic. And it was a 2-year campaign to raise awareness about plastic in the ocean. It was very simple. And so what we did is what we had was film assets. All the other NGOs in the area were running with their PowerPoint presentations and doing a good job, and we had excellent assets. So we said, let's reach out to these NGOs and give them what we have, because they have feet on the ground and we don't. You know, we have a movie, they have presence and community building, and they know who to talk to and how to talk to people. So Think Beyond Plastic became an awareness campaign. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. We went up and down the coast, we sailed over there in Bayless, we did a film festival. To you guys, that's ancient history, but to me, it was my life. It was 2009. And do you remember YouTube community, MySpace community? You know, we did graphs like this. But in those days, this was a big deal. Actually creating a campaign, promoting viral marketing model, we're talking, 8 years ago, and creating what was called the 360 campaign was very important because it was awareness building. This was a time where we couldn't even call it plastic pollution. Nobody was calling it that. So at the end of the 2 years, we had won first place at Jackson Hole Film Festival as the best 360 campaign. Awareness was growing, and we thought that we really were onto something. And so in 2009, kind of in the same spirit, we reached out to international organizations, and I co-founded Plastic Pollution Coalition along with 3 other people. And our goal was to essentially reach out to NGOs all over the world and advocacy organizations and create a common platform for how to talk about plastic pollution. And we developed 10 speaking points, and we all agreed on those, and once again, I thought we're done. And so at that same time, this graph became very popular, and some of you may have seen it. But what we were beginning to understand is that plastic pollution is about packaging. These biggest bubbles there were packaging, single-use and disposable packaging. That we weren't worried about all the plastic out there, but the plastic that is used for primarily for single-use and disposable packaging. And we also started looking at charts like this that showed where plastic started, which is about, in 1955, we started at 1.6 million tons, and the projections by the year 2050 were to be, in the millions of tons, in the billions of tons. These were all projections by the plastics industry, by the way. So we began to realize that we're onto a really, really big problem that maybe just awareness cannot solve. And so we started growing global. We launched awareness campaigns in the Middle East. This one is a campaign that we launched around in Central America. So in partnership with Vidriera Latinoamericana, we launched a campaign that stretched to Panama, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, there's one more country I'm missing, and we didn't go to El Salvador, yes. And so Vidriera Latinoamericana, for those of you who don't know, is the largest manufacturer of refillable bottles in Central America. Refillable bottles is a business that's alive and well in Central America, also in Southeast Asia and in India. It was successfully eradicated by the soda manufacturers in Europe and the United States because it basically replaces a small community-based business where you would get your bottles refilled and returned with a major concentration of manufacturing facilities somewhere, and then you start trucking, filled bottles back and forth. Which, by the way, is why plastic was introduced, because the carbon footprint of trucking stuff that's packaged in plastic is significantly lower than if packaging was in glass. So as we were working with Vidriera, something became very obvious to us. And that was that if we find an industry partner that has copacetic goals with ours, then we can be much stronger. Because regardless of the fact that we were becoming a really large organization and advocacy group, we were still, struggling for money. We were still trying to get our word out, and we were still trying to get in front of people. And with Vidriera, all of a sudden we had a real PR firm, and we had campaigns that were subsidized, funded, and press conferences that were organized in a professional way. It was big. And that is where the next turning point happened for me. It was at the launch of La Ola, which was a sculpture in the center of San Jose, Costa Rica, and it was made of plastic bottles. And so there was an artist who put up the installation, the mayor came and spoke, there was a big press conference. And at the press conference, I had brought a group of scientists with me. We had a marine scientist, we had an endocrinologist, actually a molecular biologist who was talking about human health issues, and that person later became my partner at the accelerator. And we had a great talk and great interest to the topic. And after we talked about the human health issues, and the event was over and we're leaving, and this woman comes to me. She was pregnant and she was crying. She had tears in her eyes. And she said, you know, I really wanted to talk to you guys. I'm a journalist that came, I really learned a lot, but you're giving us no options. And I said, well, you know, I mean, behavior change. And she was like, it's easy for you to say. How are we going to change behavior? We don't have glass as an alternative. And you're telling me that my unborn baby is going to suffer unpredictable developmental problems because I'm using plastic. And she said, what can I do? What options are available to me? And even if you give me your bottle, because of course I'm not reaching and giving her my bottle, she says, what about all the other mothers, all the other pregnant women, all the other little babies? I tell you, this broke my heart. And we never stopped talking about this. So on the way back, in conversations with the team, this idea began to bubble up, which is, no matter how much we tell people what to do, behavior change alone is not enough. And we have absolutely no right to go and tell the world that we know that what they're doing is harming their children and themselves without giving them a viable option. And a viable option is not just go and buy an expensive glass bottle. There's got to be another way. So at that point, my future partner, Greg Baxter, and I started talking about how do you solve a seemingly intractable problem. And he said to me, we both come from business. We both commercialize technologies. He used to work at the National Science Foundation, where he was a director of Small Business Innovation Research Division. And they actually fund small science-based companies to commercialize their technologies. So he knows how to do this from a completely different perspective. I've started businesses. And we both said what we really need is to launch an innovation competition and get the brightest and the smartest innovators and entrepreneurs from the world help us solve this seemingly intractable problem. Because what we've begun to realize at this point is we're using a material that has non-toxic properties. It leaches into food and beverage it contains. Yet it's the best material right now for food and beverage packaging. It's cheapest, it has great food presentation qualities, it has moisture resistance, it's great for shelf life, you know, I mean, manufacturers love it. We also use a material that lasts forever, and we use it for one time, and we throw it away. But at the same time, it's very cheap. So the question that we started asking ourselves is, what do we need to do to create an innovative spirit, an entrepreneurial spirit, to come up with a material that has the price-performance characteristics of plastic, but is made from renewable sources, is manufactured in a sustainable way, and instead of the endocrine disruptors which are used today that are the compounds giving it its property, you know, plasticity and transparency and the plasticizers, what if we have an innovation that creates these materials that are non-toxic, that are organic and organically derived? And what if we can make this to scale, and what if we can make this really cheap so that it meets the performance characteristics of plastics? Well, you know what? That's a wicked problem. And when you have a wicked problem, you ask the innovators and entrepreneurs. That's my natural bias, and that was great. So we launched the innovation competition, and this was the 2013 innovation competition. We got 120 innovation applications from around the world and businesses. And to us, it wasn't just the idea. What we were looking for is a fundable business, something with a business plan that is ready to go and ready to scale. And we had 5 businesses. The ones here on the right-hand side, D-Grade and Pulpworks, are still around. D-Grade is in Dubai, and Pulpworks had a new material that was actually going to be used for packaging. And once again, we said, all right, we're done, right? I mean, now we gave them money, we've identified who the greatest are, and surely we're going to start seeing changes. And so a year went by, and we helped Pulpworks find a partner at T-Mobile. We sent them to Keurig Green Mountain Coffee. Their material was actually a sustainable alternative to plastic, which was paper, but it had a kind of qualities that made it perform more like plastic than paper. So it could have been used in lieu of plastic. And you know, a year went by and nothing was going on, nothing was happening, there were no announcements, so we went and talked to both of these companies and said, what's in the way of your success? What's going on? And what we found out is that none of these people were really business people, that they had a great idea, but when they went to present themselves to a potential customer, which is a big company, their first slide is, let us show you how you can change the world. And the ROI was somewhere towards the back, and they kind of assumed that it's okay that they're not exactly profitable for about 10 years, as long as they help the company become really green and switch away from plastic. And as we looked through the deck and as we dug into their financials, what we figured out is that this is not how these companies are going to take on the industry. And this is not how they're going to be successful, because when you talk to business, you need to speak their language. And just because you're solving an environmental problem doesn't mean you have to lose money. And in fact, if you're not profitable, this is not a solution. Then that's a charity. It's not really an idea that is viable. And just because you can produce 50 grams of material doesn't mean you can scale it, or you can even get to a minimum viable prototype. So that gave birth to the Think Beyond Plastic Innovation Accelerator. And at the same time, what we were bucking against is not just that the plastic production was exploding, but now there was a synchronistic trend that actually made things worse, and that, by the way, is still happening, which is the dropping prices of commodity prices and the prices of oil, which continue to make plastic, fossil fuel-based plastic, more and more desirable. Along with that, something else that we began to learn and understand about, which is plastic consumption increased in all of the coastal areas and in the megacities, and that is where the population growth is expected to happen. So in the next 20 years or so, we're going to add about 2 billion people to the world's population. And it will all happen in these areas where the problem is already big, because there is either no collection infrastructure, or it's close to ocean and coastal areas. Big problem. And that added a sense of urgency to what we were doing, because we were no longer tinkering with a bunch of innovations that may or may not become reality. This was a sense of, it needs to happen now, and we need to move these companies forward. And at the same time, Ocean Conservancy, bless their heart, launched something called Trash Free Seas Alliance. And Trash Free Seas Alliance was basically favored by Coca-Cola and Dow Chemical and the likes, because it made them feel very good. Because you could sit with a bunch of NGOs, executive directors, and say, I am working to get the ocean clean from plastic. And their entire focus and their entire endeavor was how you can increase recycling. And you know what? Recycling is passing the buck on you, the consumer, or passing the buck on municipalities. And more than that, municipalities pay for this, more than that, it was actually completely externalizing the cost of this material that the companies are manufacturing. So we were part of I was a founding member of the Trash Free Seas Alliance, And we realized this is not going to get us anywhere. It's just not happening for us. Recycling is important, don't get me wrong. Waste management is important, very important. But it's only a piece of this very important palette of solutions. And yes, it is something that needs to happen right away, but the question is who pays for it? And when you talk about Southeast Asia, and when you talk about countries with no waste management infrastructure whatsoever, who should pay for this is a very important question. And I think you know where I'm going with this. And I'm never thinking about nice, pretty communities like ours, because we have money and this is handled, and you don't see that problem here. But you see it in Southeast Asia, as I said, and in Central America. So this is around the time when we met the folks at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And Ellen MacArthur has been talking about circular economy for quite a while. And they were very successful adopting circular economy principles in other markets. So we started talking to them about what would it take to, what are the issues that the plastics industry is facing, the plastics movement is facing, and what it is that we're doing in that respect. So for us, the next 2 to 3 years were full of speaking with policymakers, engaging on a very high level to promote the concept of funding for innovation, which is very important, creating the infrastructure for innovation. And as you will see here, we launched Think Beyond Plastic at our Oceans conference in 2014, where I spoke at the invitation of Secretary Kerry. And we were the only ones talking about completely disrupting the status quo and investing in innovation and entrepreneurship. And there's 2 types of investments that needed to flow in this. One, of course, is by investors, and then you need to have companies worth investing in. But the other one is investing on a federal level, or investing on an international level. Because if the whole global community believes that we have a problem worth solving, whether it's the ocean or polluted communities in Central America or Southeast Asia, then we need to accelerate innovation. And we need to fund entrepreneurship in that space. And because innovation is expensive, we need to form public-private partnerships to advance that. So Prince Albert from Monaco was really embraced the idea. He loved that. John Kerry there, he's with one of our entrepreneurs, attended the innovation showcase on Capitol Hill. So that message started gaining momentum. And this is when we partnered with the MacArthur Foundation, and this is where we started talking about what are the needs of the innovation ecosystem. Because when you develop a solution through innovation and entrepreneurship for a big problem like this, it is not just a bunch of innovators coming out of nowhere and coming up with a great solution and all of a sudden the whole world does it. It works like this in high tech, and I can say this because I've been there and I know it doesn't work like this in plastics. The plastic space, which is a $700 billion market, and the chemicals market, which is another $700 to $800 billion market, has very high barriers to entry. You need to have very solid science foundation to know what you're doing, to create innovation there. You need to have innovation lab. You need to have material assets so you can actually create the 50 grams of material. But you need to be able to test for compostability, toxicity, biodegradability, end of life. Then, assuming you've created this amazing new material, you need to have designers who design packaging out of this material. You need to have manufacturing capacity. I mean, if you look at the Eco Expac, which is a company that we identified 5 years ago that is able to produce pulp and partnered with Carlsberg Beer to make the first fiber bottle, they created a completely new manufacturing capacity around this. Ecologic Design did the same thing. They partnered with L'Oreal. And we just talked to L'Oreal about what they had to do. They developed manufacturing capacity. So it's not just the material, it's the manufacturing, it is the product design. But you know what? The beauty of this is the transformative impact around the entire chain. Then you're investing in a new material, then you're investing in design and manufacturing, you create new jobs along the way, and you transform the entire product delivery cycle from the beginning to end. So the innovation ecosystem, and this is literally just a snapshot, we set out deliberately to build solid relationships with academic research labs where we knew research was taking place, with labs where we can test for scalability and compostability. Then we partnered with some accelerators because we saw our role as the convener and the accelerator in the plastic space, but not necessarily somebody who would sit and teach a bunch of entrepreneurs how to write a business plan. That is not our core competency. So we partnered with those who do that. Then we cultivated the investors. And that's another tough one because this is not a typical investment. The type of investment in materials is patient money. It takes time. The ROI is actually, you can't find the next unicorn investing in materials. It doesn't work. So you need to help investors understand what are the metrics for success. How do you know your investment is worthy? How do you know you're succeeding? What are the installations that prove that point? And Julia knows we talked about this a lot because we were installing some businesses like this in Central America. That's exactly what we were talking about. How do we know we're successful if we ask somebody to put money into this? So building that innovation ecosystem was essential to success. All along, we were working with the MacArthur Foundation around the new plastics economy because the piece that was missing in our innovation ecosystem, which was the enabler of it all, was really close contact with the customer. And the customer were these guys. Because when you develop a new packaging, you're not likely to develop it in vacuum. You're developing it for one of them. And so working with Coca-Cola, working with Danone, you need to understand what their requirements are. What do they want, both in terms of price and performance, economics. And in developing these relationships, we have created tremendous value to our entrepreneurs because we're helping them understand what is it that the big business needs so that they can develop to these specs. I can't tell you how many new bioplastics we heard about in the first years. I mean, it seems like every day somebody comes up with a new oxo-degradable product and we had to go and say, no oxo-degradable, no bioplastic. We're looking into naturally occurring biopolymers. We're looking into materials that are naturally occurring, not necessarily synthetically derived, and educate everybody on the differences between the two. Mm-hmm. So we developed the Innovation Center program, and this is the program that we run every year, and every year we choose 12, through a very rigorous process, I should say, 12 businesses that fall in any one of these categories. It's new materials, business products, consumer products, cloud services, or Internet of Packaging. We run them through a series of speaker events, mentorship. We give them access to lab space, and we do this around the world. Actually, it was a very difficult process because typically the members of the class come from all over the world. They're not from one place. So we've had classes in San Francisco, in New York, in Rotterdam, in Paris, you know, wherever the entrepreneurs would come from. And in 2018, we're running a class for the winners of the $2 Million Innovation Challenge by the MacArthur Foundation, and they will be announced at the World Economic Forum in Davos. So as we kept doing this, what we realized is we need a physical home for this program. And the home would house not just the program, but actually give these entrepreneurs the lab space, because there is no dedicated space in the world right now where you can go and test your plastic product or your new plastic material or alternative to new plastic for any of these properties that I was talking about. Scalability, compostability, degradability, toxicity. There just isn't. So we would send them from one lab to another. We'd send them to Oak Ridge, to Berkeley, to UGA. And so we said we need to create a space where if you have a business plan that's worthy and if you have an idea that is commercializable, and we would evaluate this, that we would give you that space where you would test it. And we won't just throw you on the walls with a bunch of machines you don't know how to work, but we would actually give you access to latest research, science, trained and qualified professionals who would help you do this. So that is actually the Innovation Center for the New Plastics Economy that we're developing in partnership with the entire community here, I should say. It will be on location at CSUMB because they're offering us the space. But it is something that we firmly believe this community is capable of hosting and being the home for. It is a center that will accelerate commercialization. It's not a center necessarily devoted to research because there is a lot of research around the world in many, many, many labs. So the labs that we work with will produce the innovation and we will help commercialize it. That is the piece that is missing right now. And it's a multidisciplinary effort. With what we've been doing, we're entering the 5th year. We've accelerated about 35 businesses so far. They're all over the map. They're consumer products, business products, and there's just some of the pictures of the innovations that have been taken to market. It's a long journey, and it's a difficult journey. It's one of learning and experience, and this is where we need the wise people of the scientific community, business, to help us and support us in this endeavor. So we've created an advisory board that is comprised, in addition to L'Oreal, Aveda, Mars, and Coca-Cola, of renowned scientists, and I'm very pleased to say that David Apple, who are here in the audience, is a member of our science advisory board, along with Chuck Baxter, who is also a professor emeritus of marine science. In addition to this, we have on the board Driscoll's, Taylor Farms, Manpacking, so giants of packaging industry and agriculture, they've joined the board. In addition, we have policymakers. And here's the piece that I think is really important. We're working very closely with the European Union now about what policies would enable the creation, the development of this kind of innovation that we're discussing here. And I'm not talking about bans. Bans are good in certain cases, but bans can also backfire, like the ban on BPA, because that ended up in a regrettable substitution. And the substitution, unfortunately, is a whole generation of bisphenols that are worse than bisphenol A. And if you want to know why industry supported the ban of bisphenol A, I will tell you. Ask me that question later. But what we're interested in is government-funded innovation that solves particular problems or helps starting the solution of particular problems. The European Union is interested in this because they're much further ahead than us in terms of their plastic strategy. And so by the end of this year, they need to produce a plan, and we're very much hoping that our recommendations for policy will make it there. But the other thing is, and that's me with my business hat on, innovation is expensive. So if you're a business who's already invested in an infrastructure to produce packaging or materials, you need to have some incentive to do that. And frankly, the noise coming from the consumer advocacy organizations is not big enough to create this, because they throw some money at recycling and say, okay, we supported recycling. You know, Coca-Cola just put in $30 million in recycling. This is way cheaper for them than actually investing in innovation. However, government is very powerful. Government can create tax incentives to make innovation or adopting innovation a little bit cheaper, or mandate a certain percent of sustainable, renewable materials to be part of the manufactured material. So our policy, our vision for policy with regards to plastic pollution is support transformative policies that actually support innovation and entrepreneurship. And this is why we have John Laird, who is the head of who is Secretary for Natural Resources for the state of California, on the board representing policy, and Sam Parr, of course, and representatives from the county of Santa Cruz County and Monterey County. So this is where we're going. This is what the center is doing or will be doing. This is our vision for a world free of plastic pollution, and think beyond plastic. So thank you very much. Sorry.
So yeah, questions, everybody?
Yes.
Would you like to say something about how much Germany reduced their
Yeah.
plastic pollution with that law that said
Yeah.
no packaging, or all packaging has to go back to the
Yeah.
place where you bought it?
Not just plastic. Actually, Germany. The reference here is to a law that Germany adopted in the early '80s, I believe, that mandated, kind of a form of extended producer responsibility that companies take back part of their packaging, and it's cardboard, plastic, everything. So the recycling rates went up to 80%, and so the rest of Europe is trying to mimic the same. It's amazing how innovative companies become when they know that they're responsible in a financial way for the end of life of their materials and their products. Germany is a great example for this. We're not Germany, so very few countries are. The German kind of way of thinking and the country itself operates in a completely different way than us. So that policy has become the model for many extended producer responsibility policies throughout the world, but it hasn't worked as well anywhere as it does in Germany, Sweden as well, and some countries in Northern Europe. So our desire is that companies do carry some responsibility for the end of life of their products, and several times this policy was tried here in the United States. I think that probably the most successful implementation was the bottle bill, with taking back bottles, and now there is some effort to do this with bottle caps as well. But that's one example where policy actually did work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the lesson about banning?
So bans work if they're applied in a strategic way. So Jillian will tell you, the way we work on in Central America is we identify items for which there is a ready replacement, and then a ban can be put in place. We identify items where the replacement could be just handled through behavior change. An example is straws. Straws are irrelevant, unnecessary. They create waste. Talk to any owner of a pub and they'll tell you, guys usually use the straw to stir their drink and then they throw it away. Ladies sometimes drink through a straw. Straws are unnecessary. Straws are a good subject for a ban. When you look into something like bisphenol A, that initially the conversation started with let's ban endocrine disruptors, which countries like France have done. In order for the community, the NGO community, to declare victory, they actually ended up honing in on bisphenol A. And what happened is the ban went through, and everybody kept applauding and saying, this is great, the industry is supporting it, and we're being successful. Industry is supporting it because that same year when the ban passed, the patent on bisphenol A expired. So they no longer had an economic advantage. And so what happened is the ban became a marketing tool for all the other alternatives to bisphenol A that they introduced. So this is the case of the regrettable substitution. So bans need to be used, in my opinion, as a surgical instrument with precision and care. And when you have a supporting alternative, then it's good. Otherwise, it could truly backfire. Yeah.
Do you see the innovation leading to a world where there's still a lot of disposable products, but they're just either biodegradable or non-toxic, or is it really changing the whole thing so that we just don't have a lot of disposable products, that the circular economy is much more a non-disposable economy?
I think
How
both.
is it, yeah?
Jason, I think both. I think there is kind of an attitudinal issue in some of the developing countries where they are just coming to the point where they can consume and be able to discard things. And so they don't think that much about the waste this generates. They think about the fact that they're unpacking something that their kid desires, and so the waste is whatever. So we think that we would be able to, behavior change can go to a certain extent, and it could go this far, but we would like to see packaging that doesn't create waste, packaging that is actually benign, packaging that disintegrates in its own way. I tell you what I really believe is going to happen, and this is where the conversation with all these companies is going. We're not going to see a replacement for plastic that is one material that fits all applications, like plastic is right now. We're going to see different materials that are fit to fill different applications, because there is different requirements for the applications. When you look into, ketchup, when you look into multi-layer packaging, the requirements there are to be able to hold acidic content over long periods of time. And to create that material is very difficult. But you don't need to use that material for, say, or the same material, the same valuable material for a Mars bar or for Twinkie or something like that. So there are applications where certain trade-offs are acceptable. And we're talking to the manufacturers who are open to these trade-offs, open to exploring those and saying, where can we make sure that we give you what you need, but it doesn't look like that? So if you look at ecologic design, if you go to the stores, they're cardboard bubbles. And I should have brought one, and I'm sorry I didn't. But these cardboard bubbles that have a layer inside of plastic, which we're working on to make sure that it's compostable, fulfill the same purpose, but they're not plastic. So that's a perfect example of a product that is delivered that the packaging looks different. We have a company right now in the accelerator that is reinventing the entire product delivery metaphor. Instead of individual packaging, they deliver it in sachets that are made from algae or made from seaweed, and that's a company in Indonesia. So you can get soap and shampoo, just like the Tide, tablets that we have in the stores, but you can get, like I said, soap, shampoo, and you can eliminate all of these little throwaway shampoos in hotels, which is a huge industry, which is a huge business. Then we have another company in the Czech Republic that actually has created a machine that dispenses in bulk and measures it. Items like flour and rice and pasta and, stuff like this that you buy in bulk. And what is beautiful about what they do is not just that they've created the machine that dispenses it, but in working with Marks and Spencer's, which is a big retailer in the UK, and also with L'Oreal, they are interested in having one entire product line delivered to the customer in that way. So think about it, if this happens, now you're creating a way of delivering all that information that is on packaging in a label that prints out when you get your container full of your bulk product. And it's delivered to the store in a different way, not in individual packaging. And it's the packaging that the customer takes home looks different too. So you're reinventing the entire product delivery along the chain. And I'm so excited about this. I think this is going to be fantastic. And it will start with one or two companies leading the way. But we will find ourselves reducing packaging tremendously in these different ways. Yeah.
On that sort of same vein, you mentioned before that you've worked with some of the big egg companies here at Salinas, and some of these sort of industry leaders. And I'm wondering if you see across industries that there are just companies that are ahead of the curve and companies that are lagging behind, or if there are some industries where companies are either consistently ahead or consistently dragging their feet to come up with better alternatives.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So here, I have to tell you, it was incredibly energizing to go and meet with the head of Driscoll's and Taylor Farms and hear how sympathetic they are to this whole issue and how committed they are to solving the problem. And understanding what their needs are is essential to this. And actually creating a space where we can deliver on these needs in terms of product and packaging. The head of Driscoll's told me, Miles Ritter, that he feels responsible for all of this because he said they deliver berries. Berries are a very delicate fruit and they grow all over the world. So he says in order to deliver the best value to the consumer, we deliver it in plastic. And he said, we didn't think about this at the time, we just thought, how can we deliver the best product out there? So he says, now we find ourselves sitting on this pile of stuff, and we want to do this differently, help us. L'Oreal feels the same way. Taylor Farms feels the same way. So I think you will find that there are companies who think in that way, and their reality is they're running a business. And that business costs money, you know, every innovation costs money. So they need that help that I was talking about, but I also want to work with our entrepreneurs to change things around. In the fast-moving consumer goods space, it's the same. You know, there are companies who are very committed to this, and there are companies who are just kind of sitting around waiting to see who else will do this. Mars is an absolute leader in that space. Mars is committed, serious, exploring. We have a lot of discussions with them about multi-layer packaging, and my guess is they would be one of the first to adopt this, and so is BASF. So it's very exciting. There would be 2 or 3 leaders who will kind of take the initiative and run with it, and others will follow. Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you want, Hugo? Oh, everything. Sort of a chip, you sort of have this chip away strategy until you sort of build up momentum. I wanted to ask about the policy space because, you know, Europe is Europe and we're not. And, you know, the whole way that the government interacts with business is different. On the other hand, we're Silicon Valley and we're California. And I'm wondering if you're thinking or working with how to develop this policy space here that can harness the enormous innovative potential, the technology potential, et cetera, that might be a little, you know, but it's really the way we do business, which is to, you know, how we promote business.
Yeah, and the reason the European Union is speaking to us is because we hail from here. So California does have a reputation for understanding how to support innovation and entrepreneurship in a way that the rest of the world doesn't. And that's just the truth, you know, you kind of have to accept it and roll with it. It is really important to be able to focus on the positives, not the negatives, with regards to creating policies like this. So we went and met with Jimmy Panetta. We've spoken at length with Sam Farr, who is the person behind that institute, really his inspiration. And they both agree that what we need to do is create policies that create economic growth and jobs as opposed to take away. I mean, look at what happened with the plastic bag ban in our community. So we were so excited, there was so much effort. Safeway still offers plastic bags for free, and now there are these thick plastic bags. And the reason this happened is because the ban focused on a very specific type of plastic bag, and there was a business outside Monterey who said, I'm going to lose 6 jobs if you ban all plastic bags, and they're the ones who make these thick bags. So they won on the basis of economic opportunity. Short-sighted? Yes.
6 jobs.
6 jobs, you know, so 6 people, you don't want to let people be without work. So our premise is different. What we're saying here is we're creating jobs for the future. We're not creating waste picker jobs. We're not creating waste management jobs. Not that there is anything wrong with waste management. But we're looking into, I personally care about bringing people of your age to this community and retaining you here and giving you exciting job opportunities so you have a reason to stick around instead of getting a degree and leaving. And this community is capable of doing more than just, you know, retail, hospitality, and agriculture. And so what we're looking into is, where is the innovation going? What is the big problem the world wants to solve? And why can't we just solve it here? So from our perspective, creating policies that support that kind of innovation and support that kind of thinking is essential. So we've reached out to Kamala Harris, we've reached out to, as I said, Jimmy Panetta. We're talking with Eric Garcetti in Southern California. These are policymakers who are going to be coming up and developing their platforms, and we want them to think about how California could be the center where this important global problem is solved, and what would it take for the market to open up for this, for big businesses to be willing to work with us.
Jerry Brown.
Yeah. Maybe.
And
But
then
we've also worked with Gavin Newsom, and I'm hoping that Gavin Newsom will be taking Jerry Brown's job.
And looking for sort of different ways of
Yeah.
supporting innovation
Yeah.
and these kind of more heavy-handed government policies.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about enabling, and it's all about opening up opportunities as opposed to banning and restricting. It's a different way of looking at it. Yes.
What I'm hearing in your talk, I just want to point something out, and that is I'm hearing that you're listening to the businesses to see it from their point of view, which is how can I do what you want and make money? And I would maintain that listening is very helpful. It's awesome. So, when both people hear of the problem of the other, they can come up with a common solution. If they don't know what the other person's problem is, they don't come up with a solution, we don't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think listening, business is a very important stakeholder in this problem. And their challenge is that they're constantly looked upon as the polluter. And what we tend to forget is that they didn't start this business to be a polluter. They started this business, whatever that may be, to deliver a great consumer product. Whether you like that product, whether it's like a brown sugary drink or, whatever, it's besides the point. It's a product that they want to deliver in best quality and with a minimum carbon footprint. And so now the question is, how do we work with them so that we solve this together? And it's a very delicate balance, because it's very easy for your message to get co-opted and move towards recycling. And recycling to me is a very dangerous message, because we've been recycling, we cannot recycle ourselves out of this mess. We need to come up with different ways of dealing with these materials upstream so that we don't generate that much waste in the first place. So there is a good term that we used in Silicon Valley, and that's co-opetition. So, you find the commonalities and you compete where you can, and you collaborate where you can. And with business, it's a little bit like that. We need to find out where we have compensating goals and walk together, and where we, disagree, then we will disagree. But we absolutely believe that it's important to work with business and understand what they want and work towards that goal. Yeah, without a doubt. Yes?
Are any of your new companies working on a product to replace plastic pots that buy in nurseries? Those where I come from, we generate a whole lot of that, and it used to be able to recycle it, which is better than not. But now China stopped buying it, so we can't recycle it in Russia. So it just goes.
Yeah, so China is not buying our waste anymore, not getting our waste because they have enough and they don't want it. So we have a company that does that. There are also degradable pots that are cardboard pots that are increasingly being used. It's a big problem, this one. So we have a company called Seed Reseed, I believe. And when I say we have a company, we don't own it, we have it in the cohort. These companies, they're like your children, once they graduate, they keep calling us all the time. It's like kids go to college and they come back to Thanksgiving all the time, whether you want them or not. But But Weed Receipt is a great company. They're out of Florida, and you can go to our website and kind of look at all the previous cohorts. A lot of them are listed there. So they actually have an alternative for the bags that are used. You know these plastic bags that contain fertilizer, and they're nasty in the stores. So Weed Receipt have an alternative to that plastic that is different. The pots, the planting pots, we have a company that has a new material that can be used for that purpose. And that company is called Grow Bioplastic, I believe. And one thing we could not succeed is to tell them not to call it bioplastic. Bioplastic is a misnomer. It's a very, very bad word. So hopefully one of these days they'll change their name, but they're not bioplastic. They're actually biomaterial, biobenign material. So they work on this. And when you create a material that is organically degradable, that breaks down into the environment, you can do all sorts of things out of it. At this point, it depends on how big the market segment is and what the application is. So yeah, we have material. We have material that actually can replace this whole sheets of agricultural plastic that you see out there. Yeah, I know. So there is a company out of Tennessee that's working on this, and their material has the capacity to change the moisture, the resistance to moisture depending on the crop. So some crops need more moisture than others. So they are working on that, and we've consulted with all of these companies to understand what kind of equipment we need to offer them in the lab and what are their greatest needs. Yes?
Could you give us an idea of the raw materials that would go into these alternatives? And do you see any, the potential for negative consequences, say from, monocropping or potentially, deforestation from?
Yeah, we worry about this a lot, just so you know. This is something that we really worry about. And so this company out of Indonesia, for example, that is developing a material from the seaweed is somewhat of a concern. We're kind of excited, but we're also worried about this because if you create this big demand for seaweed growing on such a scale, it's very difficult to understand what the potential impacts are. So what I want you to know is for any one of these companies, we work with scientists who help them understand what the potential environmental impacts are of their business model, and we assess it in that way. So that's the seaweed. But the materials, yes, I will tell you, we love cellulose. We love lignin as a source material. Cellulose and lignin are found in agricultural waste. So if you go to, say, Southern Europe, if you go to any place that uses a lot of agricultural waste, if you go to a place that grows cannabis, all of that waste is being burned or disposed of. That's very rich in source materials that can be used to make some of these new materials that I'm talking about. We work with a company that is able to use methane and the bacteria that lives in methane to make polyhydroxy glycerate that is actually a source material for many of these. So my business partner is the scientist. I'm just kind of a dumb business person here. But he talks about naturally occurring biopolymers, and that these are biopolymers that exist in the environment that are being repurposed to create this new material. What that means is when you have a material like this, it degrades when it's exposed to the environmental conditions that it exists in water or moisture. Now the challenge with this is if you create packaging out of this, you have to keep them dry. And so the biggest challenge is how do you create packaging out of a material like this that will be ocean degradable without residue. And if you want to put an additive in it, that additive has to be organic and non-toxic. Otherwise, you know, the whole purpose of tinkering with the initial material is gone. So as I said to you, this is tough. This is not easy, and because if it was easy, it would have been done by now. Somebody would have done it. But we absolutely firmly believe it's the only way forward. Yes?
You did mention that a lot of these cohorts come back and ask questions.
They do.
Do you guys have any follow-up program for those maybe who don't really follow up themselves, just to make sure that they're succeeding?
Yeah, so, that's a really good question because I personally have this theory of the long tail. Every year when we get the competition, we clearly choose the top 10. But then there is probably another, and the top 10 get the attention and the warmth and the love and everything. But then there is usually the runners-up who are good, they just couldn't come up with the completeness of the business plan, or you could see a kernel of an idea. So this is my pet project. I like to see the ones who didn't make it. We, as a matter of principle, respond to all of them who apply to the competition and tell them why they didn't make it. But we keep an eye on the runners-up. The $2 million Innovation Challenge that the MacArthur Foundation ran is an interesting example because they were accelerating the winners of that challenge. And so the Circular Design Challenge had about 600 ideas that were sent in, and out of them only 6 were stopped. So we have about 100 now that we're looking at and trying to figure out, which ones of them we should talk to and invite them to participate and work with them on the side. And that's, to me, that's very exciting. Yes.
Petrochemicals.
Yes.
Can they be used to make biodegradable things? Because that's a very accessible resource right now. The oil industry is all set up to work with that. Can they be molecular basis of?
You need to talk to Greg about this, but I believe the answer is no. Primarily because when you arrive at a plastic material by using that synthetic method, it does not degrade. It does not break down. And it just doesn't. So that it has to do with the chemical properties of the source material. So our desire is to wean the world away from petrochemicals altogether and to use renewable sources.
I don't know about that.
So,
Sure.
good conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Biomimetics, sort of materials that replicate biological materials. I don't know if they could be made from petrochemicals, just cracking in different ways. I don't know.
Well, it's a good conversation to
Yes,
have.
it is, yeah.
Like I said, I'm just a dumb business person. My science only goes
I
that
don't
far.
think about
I
it.
only know enough science to sell it. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about so your vision here for the center, and how do you see, do you imagine, and you are here in a big agricultural area, do you imagine a kind of a supply chain emerging out of here where you might have, you're accelerating companies, you may look for source materials
Yeah.
in this area, oh, okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So how
Source
fast forward
material-
5 years, what's happened with this center and what have you done?
Fast forward 5 years, this would be a place where innovators from around the world will come with their innovation, spend time here, develop it, and test it, and demonstrate commercial scalability. We will have once a year an investor showcase and forum, which we now do around the world, and I'd like to have next year's here in Monterey, where we would discuss for investors investment opportunities, showcase these technologies. We will definitely focus on agriculture as a source of material, feedstock, and as a potential customer, and packaging applications. There's just a myriad of stuff. And just over the hill is Silicon Valley, and Internet of Packaging and cloud services are very quickly emerging categories in terms of tracers and markers and how this all fits into packaging. So we see this as the center where if you're developing these materials, you will come and get guidance here because we'll have the state of the art and the knowledge of what is done. I'll tell you what happens right now. So every day, I literally every day speak to a scientist who is developing either a new chemical or a new substitute for, you know, one of these plasticizers and doesn't know who else is doing new materials and where they're working on this. That knowledge does not exist. The other thing that happens is when L'Oreal decided to use cardboard packaging for their for that new product, we weren't talking to them at the time. We didn't know they had this need. This was about 2 years ago. They spent about a year looking for a manufacturer who can make this for them. And then they went to Whole Foods to look into packaging and they saw it and they turned the bottle and in the back it said ecologic design and then they contacted the company. So that understanding, that knowledge of what's being done where, by whom, does not exist. The connection does not exist. And then the other piece that we just discussed is when you create this new material, you need the compounds, you need the plasticizers, you need the chemicals, you need a design. That connection does not exist either. So that's what the center was. It will create these connections. I would want L'Oreal to be able to come to us and knock on the door and say, I need this bottle, design it for us. And we would throw it at the network of innovators and entrepreneurs and make it happen. That's what I'd like for it to be.
I think on that note, that's a perfect note, the 5-year vision. So let's give Daniella another round of applause.